Howdy, everyone. Happy weekend. I had a student with a question about how to implement the toString method, and I felt it was important enough to go ahead and show how to do that as quick as I could. So I'm going to do that in two different ways. One, I'm going to implement it on repl.it. The other, I'm going to implement it on Eclipse as well. Let's begin with repl.it. Let's assume for the moment that you, for whatever reason, don't know even how to get out of repl.it. So here I just go to a random web page, how to detect a cycle in a cyclic graph. For those of you who are looking for the code for that, here's where it is. That's not an assignment or anything, but I know one or two people who are curious about it, and we'll have a talk about this later on. But if I want to go to repl.it, I can just type in repl.it, and it will, it can come up with, actually I typed it in wrong a couple of different ways, but the browser still came up with the right place, and I would want to go to online Java version. And it knows about me, and so it's logged me in, but you will generally have something that looks just like this when you go to repl.it, even if you don't have a login. It's good to create an account and stuff like that, especially so that you can share your code with me, so I can, if you need help, and later on I'll be requiring you to do that. But for now, we're just going to create a new class. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call it data, okay? And my problem is I didn't call it data.java, so let me see if I can rename that. I'm going to call that data.java so that it's ready to support, it's ready to let me write a class. So I'll call public class data. And suppose that I have, say, just for example, 4 pieces of data in my class: string, state. Actually, no, that wouldn't be state. It would be date. Date. There's actually date. And we'll say that there's an integer, which is cases, integer, which is flips, an integer, which is deaths, and we'll just call it a day on that. So each piece of data, each instance of data has these 4 pieces of information associated with it. And we're going to write a method, the toString method, that allows us to print that result out. And it's going to be public, but it's not going to be static. It's going to be public, and it's going to return a string, because toString returns a string, and toString does not take any arguments. Okay, so what is toString supposed to do? toString is going to return a string that represents the object in question. In this example, it's going to be pretty straightforward. I could just say, okay, return data plus cases plus flips plus deaths. And that information now, the way that Java works, that will all just come out. Now it's going to be kind of squished together and not very nicely formatted. But let's test whether or not that is adequate. Okay, so this is my implementation. I'm not certain that this is actually going to work just right. Okay, so let's go over to main. Here's a class called main, which usually comes to me by default. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instance of a data. Okay, and we'll call it first day of the statistics, and it's going to be a new data. Now the thing is that the constructor for data doesn't exist. This is something that in the assignment associated with the figure assignment, you're going to want to create a constructor that can actually take multiple arguments. You can set data, cases, flips, and deaths, and it's not going to be exactly. There's a couple of differences here that are meant to make it so that you actually have to pay attention to the assignment and not just copy this blindly without thinking or knowing what you're going to do. So you can't just copy this character for character and expect to get full credit, okay? Now, or really any credit to speak of. But in any case, here we have main, and I create a new instance of data, but the good news is, or at least the opportunity is, that I can do first day dot date equals January 1st, 2020, okay? And so now I can certainly print out hello world, but also I can print out the object called first day. Now, I'm not certain this is all going to work. Let's find out. So we're going to run. Compiler does its thing. Does the compiler complain? It does. It complains that first date.date doesn't exist. There's two possibilities. First day, it looks like it's properly defined. What about the field date? Data. It's called data, not date. I probably should call this date, not data, because I wanted it to be the date. And so I must have accidentally entered it wrong earlier. So with that change, let's see whether or not that fixes things up. The compiler is running over here on the right-hand side. And now it's unhappy because when we, the implementation of the toString method has data here rather than date. So I'll put date there. And I'm wondering whether, because I thought I was typing date as opposed to data. But in any case, let's run one more, or compile and run one more time. And the compiler runs, and it's happy. It says, hello world, January 1st, 2020. You might be wondering what's happening here. The toString method right here is giving a string, which is the date, which is January, the string, it says January 1st, 2020, and cases, flips, and deaths are all 0, and those get turned into strings and added into the return value. So this method produces a string that represents the information in this class. And that's pretty much all you have to do to implement a given toString method. You should clean this up. You should you can add an extra, excuse me, you can add an extra space between elements, but there's one space that I just added here between the date and the cases. So you see it says 2020 and then there's zeros immediately thereafter. Now when we run, however, hopefully we will see January 1st, 2020, and then a space, and then our 3 zeros. We might want to put more delimiters between each of the data, or additional descriptors prior to each of the data. And so that's how you're going to do the repl.it version of the code. So the code itself is actually going to be identical in Eclipse, but I'm going to go through the process of creating the same code in Eclipse through the mechanisms that you use in Eclipse. Okay, so over here I have Eclipse and I've brought it up. I'm hoping that you can bring up Eclipse if you have it at all. And the first thing that you would typically want to do in Eclipse is create a new Java project. Okay, and then it would be for the figure homework. Maybe you don't have to call it this, but I'm just saying this is a reasonable project name. And I would finish. It doesn't like the fact that I capitalized it, but in any case, here I'm not going to create a module, so I'll click Don't Create. And I want to see my package explorer, so I click on this. So it's a little bit different these days. I'm not quite sure why. But the class, so there it is. So I can restore the package explorer, and now I just created a project, but I'm not seeing it. I don't know what happened. Let me try that again. Well, new Java project. Oh no, there it is. Figure homework. Cancel this. So figure homework is right here. And so I can create a new class. I have a bunch of other files that are around. It's no big deal. I can add another one by just doing a new Java class, clicking on that button there. And then the name of the class, well, remember, I wanted it to be called data. Now in the homework, I think it's called something else, like maybe figure, something like that. And so I just create that, and I make sure that it's under figure homework / source. And it's not happy about the default package, but I'm going to use that anyway. And this is the file, the beginning of the class for data. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing I did in repl.it. And I'm actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to copy and paste that code from repl.it over into Eclipse. And notice I copied the body of data into it because I already had created the class itself and the delimiter, the curly brace delimiters. So this recreates all of it. And of course, in Eclipse, I can type Control-A, Control-I to get the indentations that to match up with the curly braces nicely. And now I can add the main class. A new class. I type in main, and as you might suspect, I would like to go ahead and have a public static void main method already existing for me. So I do that. I double check that I'm in the same source folder as the class that I just created, called, in my case, data. In your case, I think figure. And now I have the main method in here, and a comment that says that you need to fill in. It says to do auto-generated method stuff, and that means that you're supposed to put something of your own in there. But we'll set that aside for the moment, and we're just going to run this and see, hopefully, that, well, nothing happens because there's nothing in the main method right now. And as far as I can tell, nothing happened. I don't know what that little window that popped up was. But let's go ahead and now we'll copy the code that we have in repl.it for main, which is, again, going to be the body of main here, the body of the method, because we've already got the method defined. So I copy that code, and then I just have to get back to my Eclipse workspace. And I paste, do Control-A, Control-I. And now, in principle, this should run. And let's find out. We'll run it. And sure enough, it runs, and the console comes up over here. This little console tab. And we see it prints out hello world January 1st, 2020 with the space that we put in before. And so the code works exactly in Eclipse as it does in repl.it. So with that, we'll finish up and try and upload this for folks so that you have the ability to implement this part of the assignment with a little bit more support. See you next week. See you Monday.